Hey everybody, it's Attorney Gerald Griggs, and welcome to the next episode of the Justice Fighter podcast. And I am so excited about tonight's guest. He's been a person I've known for a long time. He's a frat brother of mine. He's a good friend. But more importantly, he is a state representative, and he's going to help us understand one, what's happening in Georgia, but number two, what can we expect in the legislative session for 2025. And he really needs no introduction, but I want to make sure I do him service and justice. And so I'm going to introduce and bring to the stage my good friend, my frat brother, the state representative from District 68, our our elected official, Derrick Jackson. My brother, how you doing this afternoon?
Man, it is a blessing to be with you, good brother, and your listening audience. I follow you all the time, and you continue to speak truth to power. And I think after today's event, when we watch the certification of the recent election, voices like yours, we're going to need here in our community throughout Georgia. So I'm just happy to be here to add to your voice.
I appreciate that. And, the purpose of the Justice Fighter podcast on the Justice Media Network is to bring facts in real time about all things politics, all things justice, all things legislative. And so that's why I wanted to bring you on so we could have a real conversation. But first, I want you to give some context to what it means to be an elected official in Georgia. You have been one for a long time. You've run for statewide office, and now you're again the representative from District 68. So kind of tell the people what it's like to be an elected official.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. And for those who do not know me, I'm a retired naval officer. I did 22 years in the United States Navy. And after serving my country at that level as a naval officer for over 2 decades, I retired in 2005. And then I went into corporate America. And then after about 10 years in corporate America, an opportunity became available for me to run for a state legislator seat. My predecessor decided to retire, and I ran in 2016. And the good people of then District 64 voted me in unanimously by 58%. And since I've been now going into my fifth term, I realize what it means to serve. It's giving of yourself beyond your own personal capabilities. And when you think about where we are today and what service is and what is not, you got to think about the least of these. We just lost, I think, two giants right here in Georgia, Senator Vincent Fort and the former president, Jimmy Carter. And when you think about their means of service, Senator Vincent Fort, when I got elected in 2016, he opened up his arms and he basically told me three things, Gerald. He said, one, don't forget who you are. Number two, don't forget who you're fighting for, the least of these. And then number three, fight until you cannot fight no longer. And I continue to hold those principles. But then Jimmy Carter, one who lived to the right age of 100, although he served, he too was a naval officer. He served in the Georgia General Assembly, went on to serve to become the governor of Georgia, and then the president of the United States. And he would tell you the same thing. Serving is about giving of yourself. And it's not about any political gain or personal gain. It's to make sure that we govern for the least of these. And so I model myself after those who I think serve our country, serve at all levels, and some who never been elected, like our beloved frat brother, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was never elected, but he served in the same way. He always thought about the least of these, and he fought the good fight until he was assassinated at the tender age of 38. And so me being a state legislator means so much to me because I think there will be a time that my 5-year-old grandson is going to look back and ask, what did I do to make this country a better place? And I want to be able to respond to him that I was not a spectator, I was a participator. And as you well know, Gerald, we got to be participators in this fight. We cannot be spectators. And me being a participator is serving my country. Now I serve my community. I serve my state as a state legislator.
And we appreciate that service. My hat's off to you for that. One of the things that I get asked a lot about dealing with politics and understanding politics is how can people get involved? How can they engage with their local elected official, their state level representative? What would be your advice to some of the people that are watching, how they can get involved and get a full understanding of what's happening and what will happen under the Gold Dome?
Absolutely. I would say, we're in the football season. And so if you look at our calendar year, I'm going to break it up in four quarters. Next week, starting on Monday, we will start our legislative session. I call this the second quarter. The first quarter happens in the fall, where we start to run for election, or in my case, re-election. We start sharing with the community what we would like to do if we are elected. And when the people get an opportunity to go to the ballot box, they will speak loud and clear for those who are going to stand up for their interests and their rights. And so that's the first quarter. The second quarter is when we go into session. Starting January 13th, we're going to be in session what we call 40 days. It's not a true 40 days. It's spread out across 3 months. So January, February, and March, we conclude at the end of March, beginning of April, depending on how the calendar works out. That's the time when we're writing laws. On the average, we may see anywhere between 1,200 to 1,600 pieces of legislation to go between the House, where I am, and the Senate. And of that 1,200 to 1,600 pieces of legislation, about 300 of those will end up on the governor's desk. And the governor will have his 40 days after what we call sine die, the last day of the legislative session. I call that the third quarter. The third quarter is when the governor gets his 40 days to decide upon, of those 300 pieces of legislation, he or she will either do one of three things. They're either going to vote it into law, or they're going to veto, number two, or number three, do absolutely nothing, and then that law goes into effect on 1 July. That's what I call the third quarter. The fourth quarter is when we basically retreat back to our districts and travel across Georgia in this case, and do the work from committees standpoint, and for those of us who plan on running for statewide seats, as I did, as you mentioned, back in 2022, where I ran for lieutenant governor. That's when you get a chance to visit all 159 counties and make that earnest attempt to visit those counties. So that way you can get a good pulse of what's happening in the urban, suburban, and rural areas of Georgia. And so those are the four quarters. Again, the first quarter is in the fall when we have our general election. The second quarter, when we go into the legislative session. The third quarter is when the governor gets an opportunity to look at the bills that we put on his desk. And then the fourth quarter is basically that area during the summertime where folks go on a vacation or they travel across Georgia to get a good pulse of what's happening.
Okay. And so we do know that legislative session, as you said, starts Monday of next week. And what are some of the important things that Georgians should look for to come in this legislative session? I know they've already started pre-filing bills. Are there certain bills or there's certain items that you have taken particular close look at that should be on our radar? And, what do you see as a legislative agenda moving forward as we go into our legislative session?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And my goalposts for all of these bills, because like I said, when you're going through about 1,200 certain odd bills, they're coming at you fast. And so my metric Gerald, is real easy. Will this bill help or will this bill hurt or harm? And if the bill helps my district, helps Georgians, I will promote it. I will try to do my part, either co-sponsor or champion or get the word out about the bills that we need passed here in Georgia if it helps us. But most of my time, if I may be quite blunt and honest, during my past 4 terms, I had to do a lot of blocking because a lot of bills are hurting us. And so when it hurts us, then that's when we had, as you well know, we got to fight. We got to fight against those bills that are marginalizing our rights or they elevating the things that are the antithesis of equality and equity. And so those kind of bills that I do anticipate, being the fact that the president-elect already started communicating what they want to do at the federal level. And unfortunately, some of these things, for the most part, going to precipitate down to the state level. If you look at that 900-page manifesto, as you and I have been sounding the alarm, Project 2025, I can anticipate that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, Republicans, are going to use Project 2025 to try to implement some of those measures at the state level. So I'm going to see, or at least I anticipate in 2025, having to really try to block a lot of legislation at the state level that can very well hurt us. But I will continue to push and advocate and champion bills that will help us and help the least of these.
And glad you brought up Project 2025. We all know that many of the measures in Project 2025 are aimed at dismantling some of our social safety net, particularly the Department of Education, and send it back to the states. What do you see as the response from Georgia should the Department of Education be dismantled at the national level? Because we know that Georgia's public schools get a lot of funding from the federal level. And if it's sent back to the states, it will be prime directive for the House and the Senate and ultimately the governor to fill that stopgap that will be left by the hole that will be the gutting of the Department of Education. So what do you see as the proper response should that happen?
Yeah, it would be very concerning if they carry out Project 2025 aim of dismantling or destroying the Department of Education. As you well stated, a significant number of our funding for the public education here in Georgia, nearly 48% of our budget is for the public education. And so some of that, a significant number of those dollars are coming from the federal level. And so we're starting to talk about you may find children going home starving, not having the ability to have a good breakfast or a good lunch to eat. And sometimes, depending on what parts of Georgia you may be in, those two meals can mean the difference of a child learning in a conducive learning environment to starving and trying to learn. And we all know, Gerald, that it is hard for any child, regardless if they are in first grade or in 10th grade, it will be difficult to try to learn when your belly is hungry. So that will significantly impact us as it relates to breakfast and lunch. Another area where it will hurt us will be in transportation. As you well know, Georgia, some people think it's a small state, but we spread out wide. And so we need buses to get our children from home to the school, especially in those areas like in rural parts of Georgia. Over 123 counties we consider as rural Georgia, and their vital lifeline in the public education is the bus to be able to pick that child up from their house and take them to school so they can get a chance to learn during those 6 hours of the day, because most parents, especially in rural Georgia, have to go and work. They work on farms, agriculture, things of that nature. And so they may not have the ability to pick up and drop off their child to school. Another area that we can significantly find ourselves detrimental if they remove the Department of Education is the curriculum. I mean, what better place to standardize curriculum? So when we start talking about science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, we need federal dollars to make sure that we have the funding so our children in Georgia will be able to compete at the 21st century level, because we're not just competing against Alabama and Florida and North Carolina. We're also competing against children from Korea and China and Japan and elsewhere. And so we need federal dollars. We need standardized curriculum. We need to have the resources to make sure that all children, those children that we consider normal, those children who are in special needs, those children who are in urban, suburban, rural areas, they get the fighting opportunity to get 2 meals a day, transportation to school, and the opportunity to learn as much as they can, so that way they could become critical thinkers, creative thinkers, and problem solvers. If our curriculum will fulfill those 3 things, they could become lawyers, doctors, engineers. They can be the next ones to help our society move forward. And so we need the Department of Education, because if we don't have the federal level, then it's going to be a disaster at the state level, because we already know the kind of fight that we have at the state level when it comes to public education.
Thank you for that. And another part of Project 2025, which is happening, is the attempt to repurpose and dismantle the Department of Justice, particularly the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. I know you were instrumental in passing a Civil Rights Act here in Georgia, which is interesting enough that we did not have a Civil Rights Act until 2020, after the unfortunate incident that happened down in Scintilla Shores. You were instrumental with others in passing a Civil Rights Act. You were also instrumental in passing and repealing citizens arrest statute. But talk about how, if the Department of Justice is repurposed and pretty much gutted, how in Georgia we would be able to respond, because we don't have from the Attorney General a robust civil rights division. But what would happen if, on a federal level, again, that type of protection went away because of Project 2025?
You know, when you think about, to the essence of your question, if we do not have a Department of Justice, someone that should be neutral, someone that will be the Justice Department for the people. We, the people, need someone at the federal level to make sure that we have an even playing field. Listen, I don't need to convince you. You're a lawyer. I am not. But you, learning from you and talking with you, that when we walk into that courtroom, you need to have a justice system that's going to be able to remedy whatever injury that your clients may have, and that injury needs to have a remedy. And the Department of Justice is the warehouse to make sure that we have laws to make sure that we can mitigate situations and have remedies available to resolve the injury. Now, we all know that the injury may not be completely satisfied by what is awarded, but we're already anticipating, for example, that we're going to have tort reform in Georgia. And when you have that kind of battle at the state level and you no longer have the protection at the federal level, then lawyers such as yourself not going to have the necessary tools to make sure that those injuries of your client have the remedies available and the resources available and a level playing field available. There's already, if you look at the some of the tenets of Project 2025, Gerald, you know as well as I, um, if they can very well do away with the 1964 Civil Rights Act. It's not, it's just like the affirmative action law, right? So if you don't think they can just do it with the 1964 Voting Rights, 1964 Civil Rights Act or the 1965 Voting Rights Act, just look at Roe v. Wade. Just look at affirmative action. Just look at the Chevron case, right? And so these laws on the books can be repealed if the executive branch, legislative branch, judicial branch feel like they no longer need Civil Rights Act, just as they did with the Roe v. Wade, just like they did with affirmative action. So when I tell people, listen, what's at stake is our democracy. And I know we are always blamed as Democrats that we keep talking way above everybody's head at the macro level. Because we talk about our democracy, So let me just bring it down a little bit. If we do not have civil rights protection, that means someone that looks like you and I, Gerald, if they gave police officer full immunity, just as they did 200, 300 years ago, that means they can kill someone that looks like us and no justice will be served. There were a time in the United States where Black men and Black women were lynched and the families did not see justice of their loved ones. And I think about what I do as a legislator all the time. And I tell folks, and you heard me say this before publicly, so let me just say it again for your listening audience. You know, as a father, you know, my wife and I, we have 4 daughters and 3 sons. And they're all above the age of 19, from 19 to 30. And I have to ask myself every day as a legislator, am I creating an environment for our 4 daughters and our 3 sons to be able to live as long as God may have them to live? Because if I'm not, if somebody has the right to pull my 3 sons over in the car just because they're driving while Black and kill them, and I have no recourse, I can't hire you to go after a police officer that kills my sons just because they're Black without cause, because they have full immunity. We don't have a Department of Justice to make those situations, outlandish. And so that's where we are when you think about the Department of Justice. Here's another thing, Gerald, to your question. The Attorney General that this president-elect is considering to be the Attorney General, he's coming in with his own hit list to go after folks such as myself, duly elected officials. So if you got an Attorney General that's going to lead the Department of Justice that consists of the FBI and the Civil Rights Division and a host of other things, then if we have an Attorney General like that, then where should we go as citizens? Where should we go as those who serve this country? Where should we go? We will find ourselves right back where we were 300 years ago when our ancestors did not have laws to protect them.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the most important things that you've touched on is how the impact of what's happening in Washington and what will happen in Washington will flow down to the states and to Georgia in a way that many state governments are not prepared for. And I think that's what a lot of people are missing when we're having this conversation about the repurposing of the Department of Education, the repurposing of the Justice Department. You know, many people don't fully appreciate what those entities do. And use political rhetoric that really doesn't fully expound on what will happen if this should occur. And so what I do want to shift to a little bit is you talked about tort reform. And I don't think enough people understand what tort reform looks like. You know, myself as a litigator, you have to understand that the only way people get redress for potential wrongs that have happened to them in the civil capacity is through filing a lawsuit, which would be a tort action, you know, some type of intentional act or negligence that caused an injury. But when we use the word tort, and most people don't know what that means, they just think, oh, the lawyers are making so much money, so we need to limit the recovery, when in fact, they are limiting the recovery of everyday citizens who go to the courthouse when there's actually been an intentional act done to them or some type of negligence from a big entity, whether that's the government, if the government allows you to sue them by waiving sovereign immunity, or from a local company or state company or somebody that that does business within the state, or when other citizens are having basic issues with car accidents and medical malpractice and all of those things. So could you explain what is on the agenda for tort reform?
Yeah, so tort reform, as you just did a very eloquent job in describing. I use the example again. I'm not a lawyer; you are, and so I love to use examples, real examples. And so, right here in Georgia, Fulton County, where a mother and a daughter, poll workers, they went through the litigation. They hired an attorney. And to make a long story short, the mother and the daughter were awarded $146 million against Giuliani. Giuliani used his power and his position to bring about harm to this mother and this daughter. And the court has awarded $146 million to this mother and his daughter. And Giuliani said, well, I don't have $146 million. That's outrageous. That's too much money. And so now folks are using that example to say, well, you got an injury. What is the remedy? What should be the remedy? Should we cap the remedy to this mother and this daughter, let's say to $10 million? Well, who should decide, should we put a cap on the remedy? If the court said that this mother and daughter, based on the harm that Giuliani has caused, is $146 million, that's what it should be. And of course, the attorney has to get their legal fees, their court fees, their fees are associated with every lawsuit. But in the end, the judge and the 12 individuals, jurors in that box, said this mother and this daughter, based on the harm, the injury, the remedy should be, in this particular case, $146 million. I don't think me as a legislator should be in the position to just superimpose a cap, not knowing what the injury may be today or tomorrow or forevermore. And so you may have a variety of injuries. You use the automobile accident as an example. What happens if the driver just purchased a brand new car and for whatever reason, that car loses control, brand new, and the family decided to go get an attorney, and they found probable cause that the manufacturer was responsible, and they have a big lawsuit. I'm gonna use $146 million again, and that $146 million, let's say the person survived, but they have a significant amount of mental, emotional, and physical damage. If the court awarded them $146 million and that manufacturer have to pay it, then so be it. But I, as a legislator, should not think that all scenarios are created equal and just arbitrarily tell attorneys such as yourself, well, we, as the Georgia General Assembly, we're just going to put a cap on all these particular scenarios, regardless whatever the results of those scenarios may be. And I just think that's wrong. It should be in the hands of individuals such as yourself in that courtroom to determine here's the injury and the facts that prove the injury, and here's the remedy. And whatever that remedy is, so be it. And sometimes we've seen some cases could be a class action lawsuit, billions and billions of dollars. And that's just the scope and scale of the injury. And so I just think when we're thinking about tort reform, it is not my job as a legislator to think that, oh, we need to put a cap on it because lawyers are getting paid too much money. They're driving in a Lamborghini and all that. That has absolutely nothing to do with the injury of your potential client. It has absolutely nothing to do other than the mere fact somebody want to superimpose the limitations of citizens. And I just think that's wrong when you think about the justice system.
Absolutely agree with you. And I think that once people recognize that the cap is being placed on the citizen and not the attorneys, there are a lot of tort lawyers out here that do civil litigation, that are plaintiffs' attorneys, and they do make a lot of money. But you have to recognize the amount of damage that has to be done to get a million plus type settlements. And you brought up the Giuliani defamation case with Shade Moss and Ruby Freeman. Had the occasion of meeting both of them and referred them to different lawyers for that particular issue. But I think that the damage that was done was exorbitant. These women couldn't go out of the house. They were being threatened every single day. All kinds of things were happening to them. So I think that's an example of why certain awards of damage are so great to deter that type of conduct from moving forward. So, but I want to shift to another important issue that's going to come up in the General Assembly here in Georgia, and I think that's Medicaid expansion. There was a lot of conversation last session of possibly, dealing with Medicaid expansion. Georgia is one of the few states that have not expanded Medicaid, so we have hospital closures around the state of Georgia. Rural hospitals, urban hospitals. Of course, Atlanta has only one level 1 trauma center because they have not expanded Medicaid. So could you explain to folks what Medicaid expansion is, and is there the possibility this legislative session of the passage of expanding Medicaid and dealing with healthcare, since again, the federal government seems to be abdicating its responsibility. There's still conversation about the attack on Obamacare. And then when people find out that the Affordable Care Act is Obamacare, then they start realizing their medical insurance is coming from the Affordable Care Act, and they kind of push back on it. But you kind of talk about in Georgia, do we actually see a pathway to Medicaid expansion?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. And listen, I'm going to answer it. I think that's going to be a three-legged stool. So the first leg, since 2010, when the Affordable Care Act was passed, there are provisions within that legislation that allows for states to be able to basically get additional dollars from the federal government of our own tax dollars. Now, there's a cap. I want to make this point clear. There are tax dollars just simply coming back to Georgia. There's a provision in that legislation back when it was passed in 2010, and when then President Barack Obama put all his political capital behind it and got the Affordable Care Act passed. Part of that allows for states to be able to get additional dollars. Why is that important? Because when you think about hospitals for the most part has to be in a population within a 5-mile radius of 40,000 people. That's point number one. And it creates jobs. So you need doctors, nurses, technicians, everyone. And so where you look at those additional dollars Now you got to think about what can that do for a state like Georgia, which brings me to my second point. Georgia is ranked number 48, if not 49, depending on which list you look at when it comes to healthcare. Over the last 20 years, 13 hospitals have closed. 13. As you stated, we only have one level 1 hospital in the Atlanta area, and that's Grady. A lot of people think Emory is not a level 1 hospital, right? They do a lot of phenomenal good work, but they're not level 1. There's a criteria for a hospital that they need to achieve in order to be level 1. And so when you got hospitals that are closing and you need funds and you got a deficit of nearly 50,000 nurses and doctors. So out of 159 counties, 82 counties do not have an OBGYN. 61 counties do not have a pediatrician. And so now you're starting to see how Georgia is ranked number 48 out of 50 states. When our hospitals are closing, we don't have the funding that we need. And this is now all political, which brings me to my third point. The current governor created a program. And 2 years ago, he said we should have at least 100,000 people, 100,000 Georgians in this program. Well, to date, there's only less than 5,000 people. We have nearly 680,000 Georgians with little to no health care insurance, zero to a little bit. You need to have a full-time job to get benefits such as health care, dental care, and vision care, right? So you have a lot of Georgians who are part-time employees who do not have the benefits that we all should have. And so when you think about a family size as mine, where you got 9, it's 9 of us in this household. And so because of my position, I have to have healthcare insurance for everyone that's under my roof. Because from playing football to skateboarding to riding a bicycle or jogging around the block, something is bound to happen. You may fall, you may scrape your knee, you may hurt your elbow. You're going to end up in the hospital. Without insurance, Gerald, and you got to go to the emergency room, you will pay 4 to 6 times more for the same care. And so the amount of money Georgia is spending on health care and not seeing the true rewards of it is abysmal. Because of politics, this governor refused to expand Medicaid. And when you also think about Medicaid expansion, you also got to think about our senior citizens and our children. And so by us not expanding Medicaid, those are federal dollars that should come back to us. Our tax dollars are not coming back to us. Number 2, our hospitals are closing. And number 3, we continue to have a deficit of nurses. We need 50,000 nurses. That's our deficit. We need doctors in Georgia to make sure that every family, man, woman, and children get the necessary health care that they need. And when you have nearly 1 million people after going through COVID and dealing with long haul COVID, and now you start talking about HHS secretary who doesn't believe in vaccines, in fact, wants to remove vaccines. We got CDC in our backyard. People have to come from other countries to come to Georgia to get the resources of the CDC. We got CDC in our backyard, and we cannot fully engage CDC because we have yet to expand Medicaid. Will it ever be done? We will need a Democratic governor to get it done. Because Republicans, as long as we keep calling Affordable Care Act Obamacare, they're not going to expand Medicaid. It sounds good. They'll make little teasers on the news, in the newspaper. They'll send up a trial balloon. But at the end of the legislative session, this governor refuses to expand Medicaid solely on political reasons.
So, as we get ready to transition to wrap this up, and I appreciate this highly insightful conversation on the backdrop of Georgia politics. Like you said, Monday, legislative session starts, and many people haven't been down to the Gold Dome to see how bills become laws. What would be your advice of how somebody can get engaged? Say, come to a legislative day, watch it on social or YouTube, or just to be, informed about what's actually happening in Georgia. Because I see a lot of conversation on social. I see the main news channels talk about, the big headlines, but the day in and day out minutia. How can somebody get a full picture of what's actually happening down there and get engaged and maybe come to a committee hearing or see a legislative day or do something like that?
Yeah, I think when you think about what we can do as citizens, first you have to be informed. And part of being informed, I would say, ladies and gentlemen, you got to know who your state representative and who your state senator. Do you know them? Do they know you? Do you know your mayor? Do you know your county commissioner? Do you know your school board members? Do you know your superintendent? You have to know who, regardless if you voted for them or not, they work for you. I tell everyone all the time that I'm in a position where I have over 60,000 bosses. That's my district. I got 60,000 bosses. They are the employer, I am the employee. I work for them. And I always share with everybody that you have to know who represents you, regardless if you vote for them or not. Point number two, that everything that we do under that Gold Dome down at the Capitol, by law, must be provided in the public forum. So you can go to our website. Every time we are in session, we're streaming it, and it's real straightforward. You can go to legis.ga.gov. That's legis.ga.gov. You go to legis.ga.gov, and when you go there, it's not even 3 clicks. You go there. If you want to go to the house, click on the house, and then you go and you see it has a little symbol, and you can click on the link, and you can see why we're in session. And then the same thing for the Senate. And so always go to our web portal, so that way you can see our calendar. It'll tell you what day and time we are in session, what days we are not in session, and it will list all of our contact information. There's 180 of us in the House, and there's 56 of us in the Senate. First, know who your state reps are and your state senator, but also, if there's a particular interest that you have in mind, go to that committee, and it will list the chair, vice chair, and everyone else who's on that committee. So tonight, for example, we talked about public education. Go to the education committee, public education committee, and they don't have to be your representative. You may not even see your representative on it. They may not have that assignment. But that does not mean, ladies and gentlemen, that you cannot reach out to those individuals on that committee and share your thoughts and your feelings about public education here in Georgia. The third thing I would suggest is that you cannot be a spectator. You cannot be a spectator. We have too many spectators. We got spectators who don't vote. We got spectators who don't march. We got spectators who don't show up. You have to be a participator. You can come down to the Capitol. You don't need no permission slip. You don't need nobody's permission to come down to the Capitol. You can sit up in the gallery in the House. You can sit up in the gallery in the Senate. and you can watch how we vote. You can particularly should pay attention on the person that represents you, how they're voting, so you can hold them accountable. Come on down to the Capitol. That Capitol belongs to you. We call it the People's House. I call it the People's House. Your tax dollars pay for every operation under that gold dome. So you cannot be a spectator. You got to be a participator. And if you do those three things, the change that we seek, the change that we demand, you will get.
Thank you for that. And also, if they come down to the Gold Dome during legislative session, there's something called coming to the ropes. Could you explain what that is and how they can engage with their elected official on issues that they want to see change in?
Absolutely. So on the third floor, on the west side of the third floor is the House chamber, and on the east side of the building, you got the Senate chamber, and you will see what we call the red rope. It's just a maybe 2-inch in diameter, thick rope, and over there is, we call it the page desk, PAGE, the page desk. And all you have to go to that individual sitting at the page desk and say, I would like to speak to my representative, and then just tell them, hopefully you have your representative's name. So I'm gonna use myself as an example. You say, hi, I'm Mr. or Mrs. Smith. I'm here to speak to my representative. They're gonna ask you, who's your representative? You say, I'm here to speak to Representative Jackson. He represents the District 68. They're going to fill out this 3x5 sheet of paper, and they're going to put all the information in your question on that piece of paper. Not only you have to put your question, but you should say, I would like to see you at the rope. We know exactly what that means. And then when we get the break, first opportunity, most of us, I'm just going to use myself as an example, at the first opportunity between voting, I will come out to the ropes. I will try to identify who you are. So also you can put a description, black woman in a yellow dress, or black man in a cowboy sweater and jeans, whatever that description is. So that way I can identify you when I come out, and then I will approach you, and then we will have a conversation on whatever the topic that you place on the piece of paper.
Thank you for that. And so, as we, like I said, wrap up, what is your closing message to everyone that's watching on the stream about Georgia politics as we transition into 2025 and go into legislative session? What is the key point you want them to know as we continue to hopefully move the state forward and change the trajectory of rights in the state?
I think voting is a small part of our civic duty. Now, I know some people are going to send me a text and say, no, voting is big. I get, but let me explain to you why I'm going to frame it the way I am. Voting is a small part, essential, but a small part. I think the real work is doing what we're talking about here this evening, knowing who your elected officials are, those who greatly impact your life at all levels of government. Especially, I always tell folks, the government that's closest to you impacts you the greatest and the quickest. So who they are, the mayor, city council members, school board, you should know who they are. That's at the municipal level. Then next, you got your county commission level. You should know who your county commission is. Then next, you got the state level. That's where I am. And then you got the federal level. Every level of government, you should know who influenced your life based on your vote. So your vote is the small piece to enable your access to engage us, but to hold us accountable and responsible, that's the largest part of this effort. So your vote enables the situation, but it's the accountability and responsibility. And that requires, I get it, we all have busy lives. But what happens, Gerald, if you wake up one day in 2025 and you read in the AJC and they just said they repealed the 1964 Civil Rights Act? They repealed the 1965 Voting Rights Act. It's too late to start marching when we already know what their plans are. And their plan is very succinct and clear to us. Project 2025. All the things they want to be able to do this year. And so what we have to do is show up on day one. You can come down there at lunchtime, or you can start making phone calls. Find out who your mayor, your city council, start showing up at those meetings. Typically, those meetings at 6:30, 7 o'clock at night. You should know who your sheriff is. If we do these things, because voting is a huge piece, don't get me wrong, but it's the accountability piece that's larger. Because when you show up, guess what? They pay attention when you show up. When Gerald Griggs show up down at the Capitol, they pay attention. And so your elected officials should know you too. Just like how we know Gerald Griggs, they should know you too. So it's one thing to know who your elected officials are, but it's something different when they know who you are. Because there are more people in Georgia. Again, there's only 236 of us governing 11 million people. The 11 million people, they always have the power. Don't relinquish your power by being a spectator. Be a participator.
And thank you for that. And I think people really don't fully appreciate the power that they really have to reach out and touch their elected officials. We may not be able to fully affect what's going on in Washington, D.C., but we can sure fully affect what's happening in this state and local communities all around this state. So I thank you for lifting that up. And I thank you for being a part of this conversation on Georgia politics on the Justice Fighter podcast on Justice Media Network. So how can people stay connected with you as we transition into the legislative session, and how can they follow you on social media to make sure that we continue the conversation?
Yes, I appreciate the opportunity. Again, thank you, my dear brother, for giving me the opportunity to be with you on the Justice Fighter podcast. I'm all things social. Derrick Jackson, that's Derrick Jackson, Facebook. I used to be on Twitter, but I'm no longer on Twitter. It's my own little personal protest. I'm no longer on X. I'm about to get on Fanbase. But I'm on Facebook right now. I'm on Instagram. And then, like I said, I'm about to get on Fanbase. I'm also on TikTok. I just got on TikTok. So I'm a newbie on TikTok, but hey, I try to be accessible in every aspect. So that way, every genre of my constituency, from the 18-year-old to I got a 93-year-old constituent that calls me up. I had a 100-year-old constituent, but she recently passed, and so my prayers are with that family. But I try to be on every social media platform because I represent those who are 18 and those who are 93.
I appreciate that. And I do want to, as we close, I want to again issue my condolences to the 39th president of the United States, Jimmy Carter, a son of Georgia, somebody who understood the power of politics apart from the position. I never have seen him not know one of his constituents, shook hands, took photos, had conversations, and genuinely tried to bring peace to this world. So we all know that President Carter is in a better place, and we know that the state funeral will be coming up in a few days. So I strongly urge everybody to watch and and to take a moment to reflect on what politics could be. And then we all know on January the 20th, there will be an inauguration in Washington, D.C. We have been thinking about all day what happened 4 years ago at the Capitol for the certification of the election. I'm glad to see today that a certification happened without anybody trying to overthrow the government. So hopefully we can continue down that path. But we all have to remember this is our country and we're not going back. We're not going to back to 1850 or 1950. And we all have platforms now. So if people want to traffic in fake news and misinformation, we'll correct the narrative in real time. And so as we brought Representative Derrick Jackson onto the podcast, we will bring more of our elected officials. Hopefully the lieutenant governor and the governor will come on and have a conversation. If not, we'll pull up to the Capitol. As Representative Jackson says, I'm not a stranger to coming to the people's house because it's my house and it's your house. It's all of our houses, and the people under the Gold Dome work for us. But if you like this type of content, do me a favor, like, share, and subscribe. And if you want to hear more about justice in Georgia and all over the country, subscribe to the Justice Fighter podcast on the Justice Media Network. I am so appreciative that so many of you have joined us this evening to have this conversation. But you should also share the link that's streaming now on Facebook and Instagram and X. I'm still on X because I'm not going to cede any platform to anybody that wants to traffic in disinformation. So we're going to stay on X, and hopefully one day I'll have Elon on the stream and we can have a real conversation about, what democracy really looks like. But I'm so appreciative of you, Representative Jackson, for coming on to the stream and having this conversation. The platform is always open to you, and I'll let you have the final word.
Again, thank you so much for what you do, bringing, voice of the people in the community to us as well under that gold dome. Thank you for holding us accountable. Thank you for all that you do, brother. I mean, because I truly believe, even if you weren't, the NAACP Georgia Conference president or a lawyer, you will still bring the fight. And so I appreciate all that you do. And then last but not least, I would say this, please, ma'am, please, sir, share this information. Our ancestors did not have the ability to have a podcast. Our ancestors did not have the ability to walk through the front doors of an establishment. Our ancestors did not have the ability to live out a full life. We do. And if we're not careful, this is not hyperbole, if we don't take care of what we need to take care of in 2025, we can lose the positive gain that we've achieved over these many decades. So I appreciate you, Gerald, and let me know. We'll definitely would love to come back before crossover day, because then we'll have a lot of legislation that we need to bring to notice and mobilize the people, so that way we can try to block this bad legislation. And crossover is the most powerful day out of our legislative cycle.
Well, we'll definitely do that, and that's another show. So as soon as we get to crossover day, we will have you back on so we can talk about the good bills, the bad bills, and all the bills that we have to block. So I appreciate you, and most importantly, I appreciate everyone that is tuned into this stream on all streaming platforms. Again, this is the Justice Fighter podcast on the Justice Media Network. We are appreciative of you, and with that, we are done. See y'all on the next pod.